Nobody's talking about this, and after you see the numbers, you'll understand why. A family in rural Tennessee is doing something quietly remarkable on exactly 1 acre of land, and it's about to change how you see your own backyard. While everyone else is driving 40 minutes to the grocery store, spending 600, 700, sometimes $800 a month just to feed 4 people. And that's before inflation hits again. A specific group of smart, quiet, largely forgotten people figured out the most efficient food production layout ever designed for small land. It's not a greenhouse operation. It's not some Instagram-perfect raised bed garden with cedar boards and drip irrigation systems that cost $12,000 to set up. It's not even aquaponics, though you've probably seen 17 videos about that this month. It's a whole system land layout, 1 acre, deliberately planned, strategically planted, and stocked. And it feeds a family of 4, completely, 12 months a year. And the reason more people aren't doing this has nothing to do with space. It has nothing to do with money, and it has nothing to do with skill. It has everything to do with the fact that the commercial food industry, worth over $800 billion in the United States alone, does not want you to know how simple this really is. Because if you knew, you'd stop buying. By the end of this video, you are going to know 3 specific things. Number 1, the exact acre layout, the zones, the animals, the crops, and the spacing. All of it mapped out in a way you can actually replicate. Number 2, the real numbers, calories, yields, monthly production figures, so you can see the math and believe it yourself. And number 3, the most common mistakes beginners make when they try this, and exactly how to avoid them so you don't waste a single season. Stay with me. Every minute of this video is load-bearing. Don't skip. Here's what's actually happening right now. And I want you to sit with this for a second, because the numbers are uncomfortable. The average American family of 4 spent over $13,000 on food in 2023. That's according to the USDA's own data, $13,000. And that number has been climbing every single year for the last 6 years straight. By 2025, many families in suburban and rural areas reported their monthly grocery bill crossing the $900 mark, for a family that isn't even eating particularly well. Here's another number. The average American household throws away 30 to 40% of the food it buys. That's not a fringe statistic. That's from the Natural Resources Defense Council. So you're spending $900 a month, and you're putting $350 of it directly into the trash. Now think about what that feels like at the actual checkout line. You've got 4 people. You've got a cart full of the basics: eggs, bread, chicken thighs, some produce, canned goods for the pantry. And you swipe that card, and the number stares back at you, and something in your gut tightens. You think, I used to spend half this amount. What happened? What happened is the system got more expensive, more fragile, and more dependent on supply chains that were never designed with your family's stability in mind. 3 events: a trucking strike, a bird flu outbreak, a drought in California, and the shelves look different. The prices look different. And your budget feels the impact within days. You've been told that growing your own food is a hobby, that it's cute, but it's not practical, that you'd never actually produce enough to matter, that 1 acre isn't enough, that you need a farm, not a backyard. That's a lie. And it's a lie that was specifically designed to keep you dependent. I want to show you why. Here's something the commercial food industry will never tell you. Before supermarkets, before factory farms, before the industrialization of agriculture that began in earnest after World War II, when synthetic fertilizers and chemical pesticides flooded the market, bankrolled by companies that had been making munitions and suddenly needed a new product line. Before all of that, the average rural American family fed itself almost entirely from its own land. And those families weren't sitting on hundreds of acres. Most of them were working with 1 to 3 acres, sometimes less. In 1900, the United States Census recorded that over 40% of the American population lived on small family farms. The average farm size was 147 acres, but the homesteading families, the ones who weren't commercial producers, who were simply feeding themselves and maybe trading a little surplus, they were doing it on fractions of that. The knowledge of how to do this didn't disappear naturally. It was replaced. After World War II, the Green Revolution, funded heavily by the Rockefeller Foundation and U.S. government programs, pushed monoculture farming and chemical-dependent agriculture as the future. Small, diversified homesteads were reframed as backward, inefficient, and outdated. Extension programs shifted their advice toward commercial inputs. The message to American families became, "Stop growing it yourself. Buy it from someone who knows better." The industry buried this knowledge under a marketing campaign so large and so long-running that within 2 generations, most American families had completely forgotten that their great-grandparents fed 5, 6, 7 people from a single acre without a single trip to a grocery store. But your great-grandparents knew. The old Appalachian homesteaders knew. The Depression-era families who turned every square foot of their land into food knew. They had a system, not a perfect system, not a fancy system, but a whole system, a designed system, and that system worked. And today, a small but growing movement of people are recovering it, updating it, and proving that it still works, on the same amount of land, with modern seed varieties, and a little better planning. That's what this video is about. Let me give you a specific moment in history, because I want you to see this isn't theory. This isn't something someone imagined. This is documented, measurable, real. In 1944, the United States Department of Agriculture conducted a study on what they called Victory Garden productivity. By that point, at the height of World War II, there were over 20 million victory gardens in the United States. 20 million. They ranged in size from tiny city lots to half-acre suburban plots to full-acre homestead setups. And the USDA's own report found that those gardens were producing approximately 40% of all vegetables consumed in the United States during the war years. 40% of the national vegetable supply, from families, on small plots of land, without synthetic fertilizers and without the industrial infrastructure we take for granted today. In 1946, agricultural researcher William Albrecht at the University of Missouri published findings showing that a single, well-managed acre of diversified production, meaning a combination of vegetables, small grains, legumes, poultry, and a small ruminant or two, could reliably produce enough caloric and nutritional content to sustain a family of 4 across all 4 seasons, provided the layout was designed with intentionality. His numbers were specific. 1 acre, properly zoned, could yield between 8 and 12 million calories of combined food per year. A family of 4 needs approximately 3 million calories per year to sustain themselves at a healthy intake level. That means a well-run acre doesn't just feed a family, it produces surplus. It produces trading stock, gifting capacity, and a buffer against bad seasons. That research was inconvenient, because if American families understood that they could produce their own food surplus on a single acre, the market for commercial food, which was just getting its legs under it in the post-war economy, would face a very different kind of competition. The studies didn't disappear. They went quiet. The funding moved. The university extension programs shifted focus. And within 15 years, the cultural memory of the productive homestead was nearly gone. But the knowledge survived in journals, in agricultural archives, in the hands of old-timers who never stopped growing. And today, we have access to all of it, plus better seed varieties, better companion planting data, and the internet to spread it again. Today, we're using that knowledge. Right now, in this video, all right, this is the part you've been waiting for, the actual layout. And I'm going to walk you through it zone by zone, number by number, so that by the time we're done, you can sketch this out on your own land. 1 acre is 43,560 square feet. I want you to hold that number, because most people hear 1 acre and either think it's enormous or think it's too small. It is neither. It is exactly enough when it's designed correctly. We're going to divide this acre into 5 primary zones. Each zone has a specific function. Each zone feeds into the others. This is not a collection of independent gardens. This is a system. And the difference between a collection and a system is the difference between barely getting by and producing genuine surplus. Zone 1, the annual vegetable garden, 8,000 square feet. This is your primary caloric and nutritional engine. 8,000 square feet sounds like a lot. It's roughly the size of 3 large suburban backyards. In this space, you're going to grow your high-yield, high-calorie staples. We're talking sweet potatoes, which yield between 100 and 300 pounds per 100 square feet. We're talking dry beans, black beans, pinto beans, kidney beans, which yield roughly 30 to 50 pounds per 100 square feet and carry extraordinary protein density. We're talking winter squash, butternut, acorn, Hubbard, which yield between 200 and 400 pounds per 100 square feet and store for 4 to 6 months without refrigeration. Here's the math. 8,000 square feet of well-managed annual vegetables, planted in succession, meaning you're not planting everything at once, you're staggering your crops so something is always producing, can yield conservatively between 4,000 and 7,000 pounds of combined produce per year. At an average caloric density across those crops, you're looking at roughly 2 to 3 million calories from this zone alone. For reference, one adult needs approximately 2,000 calories per day, or 730,000 calories per year. 4 people need about 2.9 million calories per year. Zone 1, by itself, nearly covers your family's full caloric need. I'll be honest with you, when I first ran those numbers, I ran them 3 times because I didn't believe them. I was so conditioned by the idea that you need a giant farm to produce real food, that the idea that 8,000 square feet could get me to 3 million calories felt impossible. But those are real yield numbers, backed by real agricultural data. The USDA's own crop yield tables, the work done at Rodale Institute, the documentation from university extension programs, they all point to the same place. Zone 2, the perennial food forest, 10,000 square feet. This is where the long game starts paying off. 10,000 square feet of food forest. This is your fruit trees, apple, pear, plum, mulberry, your berry bushes, blueberry, blackberry, raspberry, gooseberry, your perennial vegetables, asparagus, rhubarb, Jerusalem artichoke, your nitrogen-fixing trees that feed the soil around everything else. This zone is deliberately larger than the vegetable garden because it does double duty. It produces food, conservatively between 2,000 and 4,000 pounds of fruit and berries per year at full maturity, which takes 3 to 5 years to reach, but begins producing meaningfully in year 2. And it builds soil. The leaf litter, the root systems, the fungal networks that develop under a food forest. They are working to make your entire acre more productive every single year. Here's a specific number that I love. A single mature apple tree at peak production can yield between 300 and 800 pounds of fruit per year. A single mature mulberry tree, which is one of the most productive and neglected fruit trees in North America, can yield between 100 and 500 pounds of fruit per year, requires almost no care. And the fruit can be eaten fresh, dried, or fermented. Plant 3 mulberry trees in your food forest, and you have, at maturity, somewhere between 300 and 1,500 pounds of fruit from those trees alone. I'll be honest, I resisted food forest thinking for years. It felt too slow, too much of a long-term bet. Then I visited a homestead in Kentucky, where the owner had planted a food forest on just 6,000 square feet, 7 years earlier. He walked me through it for 45 minutes, and the whole time he was picking things and handing them to me. Gooseberries, elderberries, pears, hazelnuts. The ground under the trees was covered in wild strawberries he hadn't even planted. He said, "I haven't bought fruit in 4 years," and I believed him. Zone 3. The small animal systems, 6,000 square feet. This is where your protein, your fats, and your soil fertility come from. 6,000 square feet divided between chickens, meat rabbits, and optionally a pair of ducks. Chickens first. A small laying flock of 12 to 15 hens on this layout will produce between 8 and 12 eggs per day during peak season, which works out to between 2,900 and 4,000 eggs per year. A family of 4 consumes roughly 1,500 to 2,000 eggs per year, including eggs used in cooking and baking. Your 12 hens don't just cover your egg needs, they produce meaningful surplus you can sell, trade, or gift. Now add meat rabbits. This is the most calorie-efficient small animal you can raise on a small property, and it is almost completely ignored by the mainstream homesteading conversation. A single doe rabbit produces between 4 and 7 litters per year, with an average of 6 to 8 kits per litter. Each meat rabbit, raised to 8 weeks, yields approximately 2 to 3 pounds of dressed meat. One productive doe, with 2 litters, gives you a potential of 12 to 16 animals per breeding cycle. 3 does, 20 square feet of housing total, can produce between 150 and 250 pounds of clean, lean, high-protein meat per year. Here's the math on protein. A family of 4 needs approximately 250 pounds of protein-rich meat equivalents per year to meet basic nutritional needs, excluding eggs and plant proteins. 3 rabbit does, 1 rooster, and 12 hens for periodic meat birds covers that, with room to spare. I'll be honest with you, rabbits were the biggest surprise of my homesteading journey. I was skeptical. They seemed fragile. They seemed complicated. The first time I raised a litter to harvest size, I was nervous. And then I weighed the yield against what I had spent to feed them, which was mostly garden scraps, hay, and a small amount of pelleted feed. And the math was so one-sided in favor of the rabbit that I immediately built 2 more hutches. Zone 4. The grain and legume patch. 7,000 square feet. This is the zone that most modern homesteaders skip, and it's the zone that makes the difference between producing most of your food and producing all of it. 7,000 square feet of grains and legumes. You're growing dry corn, a heritage variety like Bloody Butcher or Hopi Blue, which yields conservatively between 100 and 200 pounds per thousand square feet. You're growing wheat. Hard red winter wheat is the gold standard for home growers, which yields between 50 and 120 pounds per thousand square feet. And you're growing dry beans, different varieties than what you have in the vegetable garden, for protein density and nitrogen fixing. 7,000 square feet of mixed grain and legume production can yield, conservatively, between 600 and 1,200 pounds of shelf-stable, calorie-dense, nutrient-rich staple food per year. This is your flour, your cornmeal, your soup beans, your year-round pantry anchor. Historically, before the industrialization of food, the grain and legume patch was the center of every small farm. Every family knew how to grow a bushel of wheat and crack it into flour. Every family grew dry corn and beans together, the ancient Three Sisters system, which the indigenous peoples of North America refined over thousands of years, because those two crops support each other's growth, fix nitrogen into the soil together, and, combined, provide a nearly complete nutritional profile. Corn provides carbohydrates and some protein. Beans provide the amino acids that corn is missing. Together, they kept entire civilizations alive. That knowledge was not complicated. It was just forgotten. Now you have it back. Zone 5, the homestead infrastructure, the remaining 12,560 square feet. This is your pathways, your water catchment, your compost systems, your tool storage, your seed-saving area, your cold frames and season extension structures, and, critically, your water management. This zone isn't dead space. This zone is the connective tissue that makes every other zone work. Water, specifically, deserves its own moment. If you install 2 rain barrels, each holding 50 to 100 gallons, at every roof downspout on even a modest house and small outbuilding, you can capture between 5,000 and 15,000 gallons of water per year from rainfall alone, depending on your region. That water can irrigate the vegetable garden, supply the animal systems, and fill your cold frame reservoirs with zero additional infrastructure cost. Rainwater harvesting was standard practice on every homestead before municipal water systems. It is legal in most U.S. states with varying regulations on collection volume, and it makes your food production system dramatically more resilient to summer drought. This is the layout: 5 zones, 1 acre, a family of 4, fed completely. I didn't believe any of this at first. I want to be completely straight with you about that. I grew up in a suburb. My relationship with food production was a tomato plant in a 5-gallon bucket on my back patio. I thought that was gardening. When I first started talking about producing real food on real land, I was 34 years old. I had a wife, 2 kids, and a grocery bill that had just crossed $720 in a single month. I remember standing in the parking lot after that shopping trip with 4 bags of groceries and a receipt that felt like a personal attack. That was the breaking point: $720. And we hadn't bought anything extravagant. It was just food. Just the normal food a normal family of 4 eats in a normal month. And I stood there and thought, this cannot be the only way to do this. There has to be a different system. I started researching. I found the USDA Victory Garden data. I found Albrecht's work. I found old Rodale Institute studies. I found stack exchange threads where people were doing the math on calorie production per square foot, and I started building a picture of what this could look like. But I was still skeptical, because I had no experience. I had no mentor. I had no one around me who had done this. Everyone I talked to said the same thing. That's a lot of work. That's not realistic. You can't actually feed a family on an acre. Then I met Harold. Harold was 72 years old. He lived 12 miles from me on 2 acres in the hill country. A mutual friend introduced us at a seed swap, and I spent 6 hours on his property on a Saturday in April asking him every question I had. Harold had been feeding his family, himself and his wife, and for years, his 3 kids, from his land for over 30 years. He wasn't strange. He wasn't a survivalist. He was a retired schoolteacher who had simply never stopped doing what his parents had taught him to do. He walked me through his system. He showed me his rabbit operation, 20 does, rotating constantly. He showed me his chicken tractors moving across a fallow section of his garden, fertilizing as they went. He showed me his grain patch, wheat and dry corn on about a 1/4 acre. And he pulled a mason jar off a shelf in his root cellar and handed it to me. It was full of cornmeal he had ground himself from corn he had grown himself. He said, "We haven't bought flour in 11 years. I drove home that day and I started planning. The first year was messy. I got my vegetable zone in, roughly. I started with 6 hens. I planted 20 fruit trees and berry bushes. I had 2 rabbit does. My yields were lower than projected. First-year soil is always the hardest. But even in that first imperfect year, I reduced my grocery bill by $240 per month. That's nearly $3,000 in the first year from a system that was still being built. Year 2, the soil was better. The rabbits were at full production. The chickens were laying reliably. The fruit trees were in their second year. My monthly grocery spend dropped to under $300, down from over $700. I was buying salt, olive oil, some specialty items. I was not buying vegetables, eggs, or meat. I was not buying flour for most of the year. I was buying less and less. By month 18, my family had eaten 3 complete dinners in a row, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, where every ingredient except the salt and the cooking oil had come from our own acre. We sat down to that dinner, and my youngest looked at the food on the table and said, "Did we grow all of this?" And I said, "Yes." And she picked up her fork, and I watched her eat differently. I don't know how else to describe it. She understood for the first time in her life where food actually comes from. That's when I became a convert. Not because someone told me it would work, because the numbers on my own land, in my own seasons, proved it. Now, let's talk about mistakes. Because this layout, this system, it is learnable, it is doable, but it has specific failure points that will cost you an entire season if you hit them. I've made most of these myself. I'm giving you this section so you don't have to. Mistake number 1, planting everything at once. This is the most common beginner error, and it kills more first-year gardens than any pest or drought. When you plant everything in your 8,000 square foot vegetable zone at the same time, or even in the same 2-week window, you create a harvest avalanche. Everything comes in at once. You can't eat it fast enough. You can't preserve it fast enough. A third of it rots, and you end up doing less work than you should have and getting less food than you expected. And then you conclude that the system doesn't work. When the system is fine, the timing was wrong. The fix is succession planting. Every crop you grow should be planted in 2-week intervals, at minimum. If you're growing lettuce, plant a small section every 2 weeks from early spring through early summer. If you're growing green beans, stagger 3 plantings 4 weeks apart. Your harvest comes in manageable waves instead of one overwhelming flood. Your preservation effort is steady and workable. Your yields are higher because nothing is wasted to over-ripening. This single adjustment, succession planting, is responsible for more year-round food security on small homesteads than any other single technique. Mistake number 2. Skipping the animals because they seem complicated. I understand the hesitation. Animals require daily care. Animals can get sick. Animals require infrastructure, housing, fencing, feeders, waterers. The learning curve feels steep when you've never done it. And so, a lot of beginners look at their layout, feel overwhelmed, and decide to just do the garden first and add animals later. Then, later never comes. Here's why this is a critical mistake. Your animals are not an add-on to your food production system. They are the engine of your soil fertility. Chicken manure, composted correctly, is one of the highest nitrogen organic soil amendments available. Rabbit manure, cold manure, meaning it doesn't have to be composted before applying it to the garden, can go directly onto beds and is so mild and balanced in its nutrient profile that old-time gardeners called it black gold. Without your animals producing fertility, your vegetable garden is mining your soil. Every harvest removes nutrients. Without a system to put them back, without animals, without deep composting, without intentional nitrogen management, your soil gets poorer every year. By year 3 or 4, you're fighting diminishing returns. The fix is to start small, but start immediately. 6 hens and 2 rabbit does. That's your minimum viable animal system. Get them in the first season. Learn their care while your garden is getting established. They will pay you back in fertility for everything you invest in their management. Mistake number 3. No preservation system. You can grow all the food in the world and still go hungry in February if you don't preserve it. This is not an exaggeration. A 1-acre layout at full production will produce so much food between June and October that if you don't have a functioning preservation system, canning, dehydrating, root cellaring, lacto-fermentation, dry storage, you will lose enormous amounts of that production to spoilage. Your preservation system should be planned before you plant your first seed. You need a minimum of 4 basic preservation methods: a water bath canner and jar supply for high-acid foods, tomatoes, pickles, fruit jams, salsa; a pressure canner for low-acid foods, beans, corn, meat, soups, stocks; a food dehydrator, or a solar dehydrator which costs almost nothing to build, for herbs, fruit slices, dried beans, and jerky; and a root cellar situation, even a simple one, even a 5-gallon bucket buried in the ground, for potatoes, sweet potatoes, winter squash, carrots, beets, and dry storage crops that prefer cool and dark. This knowledge, home food preservation, is another piece of information that disappeared from mainstream culture within 2 generations. In 1943, at the height of Victory Garden production, an estimated 3 billion jars of home-canned food were processed in American kitchens. 3 billion. Today, home canning is considered a niche hobby, but the Ball Blue Book of Canning has been in continuous print since 1909 because the knowledge has always been there. It just stopped being taught. Mistake number 4. Not saving seeds. This is the mistake that makes you dependent on an external system every single year, no matter how much you grow. If you buy new seeds every spring, and the commercial seed industry has done an extraordinary job of making this feel normal and necessary. You are one supply chain disruption, one company closure, one inflated price increase away from losing your ability to plant. Seed saving is not complicated. It requires understanding which crops are open-pollinated versus hybrid, and always choosing open-pollinated heirloom varieties for anything you plan to save from, and learning the basic seed-saving process for your primary crops. Tomatoes, beans, peas, squash, corn, and lettuce are all beginner-friendly seed savers. Learning to save from just these 6 crops gives you the ability to replant your vegetable garden indefinitely, without ever buying another packet. The financial implication is significant. A full seed order for a 1-acre vegetable garden can run between $150 and $300 per year if you're buying everything new. After 2 years of seed saving, that number drops to near zero for your open-pollinated staples. Over 10 years, the savings compound into something real. Harold, the man I told you about earlier, had not purchased a seed packet in over 20 years. He had seeds in his root cellar that were older than most of the gardeners watching this video, and his plants grew with a specific adaptedness to his local climate and soil that no commercially produced seed could replicate, because those seeds had been selected and saved in his specific environment for decades. That's the kind of resilience we're building toward. Picture this a year from now. It's a Tuesday evening in mid-July. The sun is going down late, the way it does in summer. You walk out to your garden to pull together dinner. You take a basket and you walk the rows. You're pulling tomatoes, Brandywine and Cherokee purple, big, heavy, warm from the sun. You're cutting zucchini, grabbing a handful of green beans. You've got basil at the end of the row that smells like summer concentrated into a plant. You stop by the rabbit hutches. Your youngest is already there, checking on the litter that was born 3 weeks ago. Your middle kid collects the eggs from the chicken coop. 4 eggs today from the morning's lay that you hadn't gotten to yet. You head back inside. That night's dinner is made entirely from your land. The tomatoes become a sauce. The eggs get scrambled for your youngest, who decided at the last minute they didn't want the same thing as everyone else. The green beans are roasted. The zucchini is grilled. There's a loaf of bread on the counter that you baked 2 days ago from flour. You ground yourself from the dry corn you harvested last fall. Your grocery bill last month was $118. It covered olive oil, salt, a few specialty items, and a bag of oranges because you can't grow citrus in your zone. Everything else, the vegetables, the eggs, the meat, the flour, the preserved goods lining your pantry shelves, came from this acre. You're not tired. You're not overwhelmed. You are in a rhythm. It took about 14 months to find that rhythm, to stop feeling like you were managing chaos and start feeling like you were running a system. But you found it, and now it runs. Your grocery budget, the one that used to be $720 a month, is now $120. The difference, $600 per month, has been redirected. Some of it goes into improving the homestead. Some of it goes into a savings account. Some of it just stays in your pocket in a way that nothing was staying before. Your kids are learning something that will serve them for the rest of their lives. They know where food comes from, not in the abstract, not from a lesson in a classroom, but in their hands, their days, their routines. They know that a seed goes into the ground and a plant comes out. They know that a rabbit becomes a meal. They know that eggs don't start in a carton. And that knowledge is not nothing. That knowledge is a form of freedom. That's not a fantasy version of this story. That's the version with real numbers, real timelines, and real outcomes that real families are living right now on 1 acre of deliberately designed land. That is what this layout does when you actually do it. Drop a comment right now and tell me this. What's your biggest barrier to starting? Is it land, money, knowledge, or time? That's the question. Land, money, knowledge, or time? I read every single comment on this channel, and I personally reply with specific next steps based on exactly where you are. If you tell me you've got the land, but not the knowledge, I'll point you to exactly where to start. If you tell me you've got a 1/4 acre in a suburb and you're not sure it counts, and I'll tell you why. If this video gave you something real, subscribe. Not for the algorithm, for you. Because everything we put on this channel is designed to build on itself. Next week, we're going to go inside a working rabbit operation that's producing 200 pounds of meat per year from a space the size of a 2-car garage.